welcome to Coming Out with Lauren and Nicole. We are a weekly podcast where we have queer folks on from all walks of life. They tell us the tales of how they came out to friends, family, and the world at large.
Because who doesn't love a coming out story?
Today, for the first time doing a live show, you can see who are here. Briana Venskus from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Supergirl, Walking Dead, Good Trouble now, and I also found out theater background, like myself. Yes, theater. We were discussing, we were like, you know, maybe it'd be nice to just ditch all this and do theater in the woods for the rest of the life.
Yeah, it's a strong option. Still.
It's a strong option.
It's still a very strong option.
It's always an option. It's always there. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
To our first live show. How many of you are regular listeners? Wow! And how many of you are here for the first time?
Even better.
Oh my God. So I thank you so much for showing up. We know it's a long weekend, and if you were partying last night and feel like I do, it's a miracle.
You might be able to hear it in our voices. We were at a very loud party last night, but the room is a little toasty. But we're gonna.
It's like a warm blanket.
It's like a warm, yeah. It's like one of those pressurized stress blankets.
Oh my God, I have one.
There you go.
No, I do. It's seriously, it's like a 10-pound blanket, but I thought I was supposed to get like the heaviest one at first, so I got it 25 pounds and I couldn't breathe. It's really bad. Anyway, I exchanged it. It's okay, guys. Oh my goodness. So, anyway, so thank you all for being here. The way that our podcast runs is like I said, we talk about coming out stories, and we usually start by asking first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who you are, what brought you here?
I am Briana Venskus. It's weird because I have to talk but also look at people. It's a real multitasking thing. Briana Venskus. I am an actor currently living in Los Angeles, and what can you say about being a human in the world? It's like I ride a lot of motorcycles and I hang out. I ride motorcycles. I make food.
That's two
in a row.
For me.
I know.
You sound like a cyborg who's like trying to pass yourself off. You're like, I don't know, I make food.
I breathe air and shower.
I have a belly button, as we all do.
Wait, you have a belly button?
Should I not? No, I just want to be cool. Briana is on, as Nicole mentioned, Good Trouble. Fun fact, also on that show is Daisy Egan, who, if you've listened to the podcast for a while, was one of our very first guests, and I think maybe our first one that we ever recorded. We released it a little
no way.
Yeah, I think
she was the very first one. And
when we were still recording in the closet.
in the
literal closet.
What a metaphor.
I know. And you know, my mom was the one who pointed out the irony.
Moms always do.
Moms always do.
They always know.
Yes. So we usually start by asking, how do you identify? I got a little taste of this on the bi-rep panel yesterday. But yeah, how do you identify?
Well, I'm going to start off by saying, for me personally, and this is not for everyone, I think that labels are for other people and not for myself. I think it's a way for other people to kind of find a way to relate and or figure out where I am in the world. For myself, I'm me. I'm attracted to who I'm attracted to, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But for the sake of, people who aren't in this room or listeners, the closest label I give myself is bisexual. In the last 4 or 5 years or so, I primarily dated women. So I like to think it's a sliding scale a bit in terms of how you're feeling. So more recently, more women, but that in no way negates the fact that I also am still attracted to many men. So, yeah,
That's great.
Yeah, nice.
Nice.
So,
nice.
So you're not gonna oh my God, this just reminds me, I don't know, also identifying as bisexual, it's so funny because you just constantly come out. You bring somebody else of a different gender after you've been dating one gender or whatever for many years, and actually at the. I'm still me. Surprise! As somebody said yesterday, as CB Lee said yesterday, which is my new favorite thing, at the Bi Rep panel, much like werewolves.
Still a werewolf.
Even when werewolves are in their human form, they're still werewolves. So hashtag still a werewolf. We're getting it going.
But the sense of wonder from everyone when you tell them is, there's something childlike about it and very like,
Oh yeah.
it's like Christmas morning every day. They're like, you're a what?
A bisexual mustache.
How does that work? Oh my god, that's so crazy. We know that you're from North Carolina.
Yes.
You were recently a queen
Yes.
of a festival.
The Azalea Queen.
Queen of North Carolina.
That's basically what I got from the post.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah, no, it was a really cool festival, being from North Carolina. It's called the Azalea Festival, which traditionally is a very, southern festival.
Yeah, sure.
Bells and full garb, and like there's a citadel military routine they do. It's very southern. And so for them to choose me this year was a not only I think a shock initially to me, but once I got there and did the festival and experienced it was really very wonderful. And it was, I think, kind of took, even being from North Carolina, because in the past couple of years we've kind of had a bad track record, it's been really nice to go home and kind of have like a rejuvenated hope for humanity. So and I think that's kind of how I walked away from that festival. Was like, even with a little bit of feedback that was not so positive from the experience, overall the general festival was just incredible, and I met so many wonderful people, and I think it was just cool to see all of my disciples.
And now you're mad with power.
All the peasants.
And meet your many husbands.
Exactly. All my many
But you
husbands.
did narrow them down.
I did. I finally narrowed it down to a donkey.
Right.
I haven't posted that photo yet, but.
What? What?
You clearly couldn't follow.
So the entire festival, they had, I probably took more pictures in that week than I have in my entire life. But they just kept sticking with all these very attractive men in uniform, like full on uniform. And I mean, I don't care however you feel about military or whatnot, but they're very handsome and very polite and just like hold themselves in a way that just kind of makes you go, So I had a hard time dwindling down which would be my husband, but I ended up with a donkey. Seems appropriate.
At the end of the day, it's still the best.
Yeah.
So I assume that your coming out story begins in North Carolina.
Yes.
Which is why I brought it up. So tell us, what is your coming out story?
Wow. I want to begin my coming out story with another version of a coming out story, if that's all right.
Oh, please.
Okay, cool. So my dad was gay, still is. I mean, I would assume. He is. And so when I was a kid in North Carolina, mind you, I was listening to NPR. and it was the early 90s, so there was still a lot of the HIV/AIDS epidemic that was very much so being covered in the news. And I remember hearing something about it on the radio and asking my mom at the time, they'd already separated at this point, asking my mom, I was like, Mom, what's gay? And she was like, well, honey, I don't know, maybe you should ask your father. So, cut to.
Before we cut to, what was your reaction to that? Were you like, okay?
I was a kid, so I was like, yeah, all right, I'll ask him. I'll ask him.
Dad's failed in this one for some reason.
I wonder why. No, but honestly, I think this speaks a lot to just being the nature of humans. At 4 or 5 years old, it didn't fucking matter. Like I just was like, what's gay? And I wanted to know, and then if she told me, I'd be like, okay, cool, great. But obviously she didn't want to steal the thunder away from, my dad if that was some sort of situation he wanted to explain himself. So she calls him and is like, hey, you might want to get ready for a conversation. He takes me out to my favorite restaurant and sits me down with his then boyfriend, who he'd been living with for a couple years, who I knew. I always knew he was around, and in my mind, of course, it was just my dad and the other guy, like my other guy. And they sat me down, and he was like, honey, he was like, so your mom told me you had a question. And I was like, okay, whatever. I was like eating my falafel. And he was like, do you know what gay is? And I was like, no. And he was like, okay, well, I'm gay. And I like stared at him for a second, and I was like, what? And he was like, do you know what that means? And I was like, no. And I kid you not, I started crying, and I ran out of the restaurant. Because I will say, at that time, the only reference I had to gay was HIV and AIDS.
So we hear that from so many of the people we've had on, where it's just like, that's the association, and that's all their parents can think about when they come out to them.
100%. And so for a 4-year-old at the time in the early 90s, or 4 or 5 in the early 90s, that's where your mind goes.
Yeah.
So I ran out of the restaurant, ran back in. They actually chased after me into the street. Even funnier part of the story, I ran into a Christian bookstore partner.
Like, this is our moment.
Time to shine, you guys. Gathering all their Bibles. So imagine me, a crying 5-year-old in a parking lot with 2 gay men. Christian bookstore. So that was kind of my first introduction to what a coming out story would even be like in that realm. And to be fair, North Carolina in the 90s was not necessarily a terrible place, but
I vacationed there.
It was lovely. But there's definitely, living in the South and being different in any respect, and that could be being Black or being, Hispanic, anything. It was very apparent at the time when you stood out in a different way. So I got very lucky having people, not only my mom, who really was just wanted my dad to be happy, and my dad, who was with his partner and just wanted to be with his partner. So I had a very supportive upbringing. So in terms of me coming out, and I think I kind of touched on this a little bit in the panel yesterday, I didn't really have to, because I had a support system in place where it didn't matter. They just wanted, I think, me to be me more than anything else. So if anything, I kind of hope that the coming out story is more of like a hope for the future, and people can hear it who are now having kids and can then relay that into their own lives and say, if this happens to be the case, like, I don't even need to talk about it because they are just who they are. But I did recently have a conversation in the past couple years with my mom where we were sitting in a hot tub, like you do with your mom, having a couple drinks. It writes itself, really. And she just she brought it up. She was like, I introduced her to my girlfriend at the time who was new, and she was like, it's interesting, you never came out to me. And I was like, did I need to? I was like, I was 13 and you walked in on me and my girlfriend making out my bed. I'm like, I feel like I didn't really need to go into detail on that one.
Yeah, you went for the visual as opposed to we have so much in common. Wait, and that was at 13?
Yeah, I knew out the gate. I was like, I was a kid, and I was in Catholic school. I was pounded with religion, and hey. For those of you listening on the radio, someone just went, "Hoo." I was very much so in a religious setting, and also being in North Carolina in the South, you are told very blatantly how you're supposed to be, and how you're supposed to act, and how you're supposed to be perceived.
And the gender roles are like
very defined.
Debutante.
Well, they still are, and even when I went back to the festival, I'll touch on it, but they're still there. It's still very present.
But aren't they called coming out balls? That's what I never understood when I was younger. I was like, they did it. They have balls for it.
The coming out balls, of course. The great old tradition of North Carolina coming out balls.
I've heard that too, though. That is a phrase, right? It's a coming out.
Yeah.
But like, aren't you like coming out as a woman or something?
Yeah, it's your presentation as a woman into the world.
That's bad.
Yeah.
I thought they were like super woke. My sense is all.
Yeah, it's, you'll take a visit there one day with me. We'll show you.
My first foray.
But I mean, it's growing up in that area. You're very much so told who you're supposed to be, honestly, and you're shown very specifically the path you're supposed to go down, and you're supposed to get married at a pretty young age and have kids, and not that anything is wrong with that. I think that's my friends who have done that are so happy, and I support that fully. But for me, it clearly was not an option. That wasn't in my plan. I wanted to go do shit, and I wanted to fly to California and fuck off for a couple years. Like, have a good time and, like, find out what I wanted to do. So it was definitely weird, and I think the only reason why it was even possible was because my parents were so fucking cool. And so I don't think I could have ever done what I did and what I've done until now because I just had the support, and I always had somebody at home being like, fuck those guys. You don't need to listen to that. Like especially in Catholic school, my God. Imagine being in Catholic school in the South with Southern teachers who have somehow decided to teach Catholicism to you. Like you're just literally being attacked from all angles about anything that's different. So, I mean, we barely had a science class. Like, barely had a science class. Like, we learned about, like, physics, and that was, like, it, and that was basically him just going, look, it fell.
Now let me tell you about Jesus.
Let's bring it back to Jesus. Which is, and I will say, I don't want to make it sound like I'm slamming religion, because I think it's wonderful the people who find that path and who live it and love it. I think that's awesome. But for people who are different, and for people who don't necessarily subscribe to that, to be brought up in that circumstance was definitely challenging. And I don't think I could have done it if I didn't have such awesome parents. So if you're a parent, be awesome. Don't be a dickhead. be supportive no matter who your kid is, because guess what? They're still yours no matter what.
Yes. So like, one of the things that we often ask people, and especially in this case where like you had that support, so you didn't have to make some like grand announcement. When did the thoughts or the feelings start like percolating? I mean, you were really young.
Yeah. I was definitely young. I mean, I think it wasn't even so much a moment where I registered that I was even thinking about people differently. I think I just kind of came of age when you're a kid. Well, you're like 7, 8, and you start kind of like being like, that guy's cute or that girl's pretty. Like, I think that's really kind of when it happened, and it was never taught to me that it was wrong, except for my teachers, to think that way about a girl versus a boy.
So what did you think when your teachers said shit like that?
Yeah.
Where you were like, wait, hold on, mom and dad are saying this, but teacher is saying this.
100%. And I luckily, you know, and much like I am today, will say pretty much anything on my mind. And so I went home and I was like, Mom, the priest so-and-so said that you're gonna go to hell if you're gay. And I was like, I don't want my dad to go to hell. Am I gonna go to hell? And she was like, honey, she's like, no, you're not gonna go to hell. She's like, first of all, I have a lot of other thoughts about hell and heaven and all that. She's like, but you're fine. She's like, just be a good person. Do what you need to do. And I think that's sort of the mantra I've sort of carried through is like, no one can, I mean, clearly anyone can say anything about you, but nobody can say anything that matters if you're doing the right thing for yourself and being a good person. And I think that's kind of what she taught me. And it's unfortunate that there are still communities and churches out there that teach these things, where it doesn't matter if you're a good person, if you're a certain way, you're going to a bad place, or you're a bad person, or you're not right. And the fact that that's the mentality, and we're not teaching, you know, just being genuine and making people smile and making people feel loved. Like, if that's not a priority, it's like, okay.
Well, then what is religion for?
Exactly. Then what is religion for? If
Yeah.
that's not a priority, if those are not the founding parts of your religion, then what's the point? Like, I honestly, being angry about shit is so exhausting. Like, when you're mad about something, I want to sleep all day when I'm mad about something.
Well, that's why people get tired on Twitter, you know?
Yeah,
I'm just
completely.
like, oh God, I need to take a break from Twitter. I'm like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, you're like, yeah,
We like never have an audience. So since we do have an
I know,
audience,
it's so fun.
by applause, how many people had an experience where religion was sort of a presence of... Congrats on making it out of the circumstances and to whatever degree it still functions in your life. But yeah, I think
It's
a huge thing.
It's wonderful though that you didn't internalize it, because we've had several people on the podcast who even to this day were like, you know, in their 30s and are still, they feel like it still crops up. Like they'll be walking down the street, you know, holding hands with their significant other and have like a moment of, oh my God, you know, because it's just so deeply in there. And it was funny, like my dad finally started listening to the podcast because my mom, but it's because my mom is sending him like the most vanilla episodes possible where I don't talk about my sex life. She's like, here, maybe this one. So, and I think he gets that without saying it, because he's like, yeah, send me the ones you think I'd like. But it's so funny because he said the other day, he was listening to one, I think Greg Barnett's, which
Mormon,
yes.
We talked
And
a lot about this.
he, first of all, he said something that blew my mind, and my dad is like, I'm not gonna call him woke. I'm not gonna go that far. But like but my dad is like extremely liberal. Voted for Bernie during the primaries. But like, but like he's very liberal. His sister is gay. His daughter is queer. Like he gets it, ish. But he was like, so I didn't know the Mormon Church was like so outspoken against queer people. I was like, they basically funded Prop 8.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't know that. I was like, yeah, it wouldn't have passed if they didn't throw a ton of money at it. He was like, oh wow. And I was like, where were you? But he also was like, you know, I really had never stopped and thought about how people who come out would still carry so much of that with them, that would still feel that traumatic, and that they would still be questioning after so long, you know, am I doing something wrong? And I was like, yes, it's called internalized homophobia. But he really, like, this is like a 60-something-year-old, you know, straight white dude just going like, oh wow, I didn't know that those experiences stick with you. And I think that it was a realization for me too, because I think that some people really think that once we come out, we're like, healed. Coming out ball. We have a coming out ball.
And for the record, I will say, and Nicole and I, for those who don't know, we both volunteer at the LA LGBT Center, and in the women's coming out group, a thing that when I facilitated that I talk about a lot is like, you know, these women they come out recently and they're really, really struggling it. And I'm always like, look, I've been out since college, I had liberal parents, like all this stuff. I had the best circumstances you could have. And I still have moments where, like, if I'm wearing my rainbow sunglasses, but I'll take them off if I'm, like, going into a certain building. Or, like, even just here, I wore my Gay OK shirt yesterday, and walking just through that little bit of the casino before I got to, like, the Utopia here, I had a moment where I was like, oh, I don't wear this shirt very often, and I feel on display right now. And that's me, who had the best possible circumstances. So someone coming from a background that you're describing, like, that shit is hard. So, like, give yourself a break. Don't, like, if you're feeling that stuff, that is normal, and it will, I won't say it will pass, because I still deal with it, but you will learn to, like, cope with those voices.
Yeah, and I
get
think,
softer.
too, the important thing is, like, I think, just in culture in America in general, the way that we deal with any sort of adversity is we either go get fucked up, we go drink, we go out and party, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. But I think there's a lot of merit to the idea of sitting in your shit for a while and really working through the things that are bothering you. And I, like, that's not to say, like, clearly, like, much like you, I had the best case scenario. Like, I could not have had more supportive people behind me, but that doesn't mean that I didn't spend a lot of, like, weekends and Saturday nights and late nights after getting off work sitting at home being like, like fuck my life. Like what is going on? So it's as much as it is sort of it takes work. Like it just takes
Yeah.
work. I think being a human takes work, but I think when you are up against what this community in particular is up against, it takes even more work, and it's a lot of yourself. And I think that's why I'm able to be the way that I am and as comfortable as I am today, is because I literally sat in my shit for a long time and worked through a lot of it, and now I just don't give a fuck.
Oh.
And I gotta tell you, it's really great on the other side. When you get to that point of just not giving a fuck, it's really awesome. And that's not rooted in any sort of negativity, that's just rooted in positivity and empathy for every creature on the earth, and realizing that they are worth just as much as you are, even if you don't agree with the things that they say. And I think, especially coming from North Carolina and having just done that festival, I came up against a lot of very Republican, very religious, in the box of what life should be, and for them to encounter me, and some were nice, some were not. That's just the way it is, and you kind of have to take it and understand. I had to constantly tell myself, like, listen, put yourself in their shoes. You're told one thing your entire life. It's passed down to you generations. You have an institution that you attend once a week, maybe even twice a week, that tells you that all these things are correct that you're believing, and then you're faced with something that's different. So as easy as it is, I think, for someone in my position or our position to lash out at these people who don't understand us, you also have to understand that it's very scary for them. Like it's very frightening for them to be faced with something that's not like themselves. And while that's not your responsibility and it shouldn't be your problem, and they should not treat you differently because of that, you just have to come from a place of empathy when you're dealing with people who don't understand you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, to a point that my mom made on the podcast when it comes to parents, but I think this applies to everyone, perhaps Republicans in particular. No, but we all grow up on stories, right? I mean, that is it, and it's just some of us are fed some stories and some of us are fed others. And part of, I think, the difficult job of getting to know yourself and doing that work is actually deciding which of those stories about yourself you believe, and which stories you want to carry forward, and which you're like, you know what? No, that is just a story. That is not fact. And I think thinking about it from that standpoint and going, okay, we have different sets of stories happening.
Yeah, and also, like, you create your own reality.
Yes.
It's you surround yourself with the people you need to surround yourself with. You find the support you need. Yes, there is a certain framework that you have to function inside of being in the world and living in the state you live in or the country you live in. But you have control of your immediate surroundings and your immediate bubble. And I think the more you take power over that, and the more you really dictate what that looks like for you, the easier your life is going to be, and the more confident you'll be in who you are in the world. Because you're gonna feel safe, and you have to create that safety for yourself. Nobody else is gonna do it for you.
Which is why we talk so much about chosen family.
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
that idea of, like, I mean, hopefully you come up in that, like you grow up in that. But if you don't, which a lot of people don't, you build that when you get out of your circumstances. And so it's just important to remember, like, every moment exists in that moment, and we tend to think, like, whatever is going through, we're like, this is how it's going to be forever, and it's just not. Like, you will meet people, you will form your own community, you'll form that circle for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, even growing up, like, because I moved to California when I was 16 to go to school.
Wow.
I graduated high school early, so I moved to California when I was 16.
Oh my God.
Me as a 16-year-old in California versus me as a 31-year-old in California are two completely different people. And I have two completely different sets of friends and circumstances and beliefs and understandings about the world. And I know just from watching people who are older than me, it's going to change in another 5 years, and another 10 years, and another 20 years. Like, you're always going to be evolving. So don't ever feel like what you're up against now is what you're going to be up against later, because it's not necessarily the case. And I think especially, we were just talking about this in the last panel, we're moving in such a positive direction in terms of there's more of us that are being loud and active and really trying to represent ourselves, and I think it's only going to get better the louder we get. Yeah. And the more positive we are about how loud we are. It's not negative positive. It's not negative loudness. It's lifting up all of the good that we're doing is only going to make it easier for us.
No, absolutely. And I think something that I love about the way that you approach your own identity and what you said of your story is that it has a fluidity to it that I'm hoping we are all starting to embrace and get more comfortable with. I think we're so taught from a young age, no matter how we identify, straight, queer, otherwise, we're so taught to that things are going to be fixed, right? That we are going to end up with somebody. That's always that thing drives me insane. End up with. I'm like, great, so that's the end? That's the end. I find a person and I'm complete and that's the end. I guess what? Then what happens next? But you know, I think allowing ourselves that fluidity to go like, I don't know what is coming next, maybe. And I'm going to, if I can approach it with love and an open heart, then everything's going to be okay. At some point, it's going to be okay. I know for me, like with bisexuality growing up, I was like such a like a Disney kid. I loved all the fairy tales. I mean, I still do. And but it was funny when I came out as bi because I was like, okay, so is it going to be like Prince Charming or Snow White? And like, what does like Snow White and Ariel look like together? Like, what?
Yeah, I would also like to know that.
Yeah, throw a little Prince Eric in there and we're good. But like, yeah.
Also, why are they all white?
Oh,
Yeah. Nothing against I love white people. Trust me. But as a Puerto Rican woman. Hey, come on.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing is like it tripped me up for so long not being able to see what the next thing was. Like where that journey was going to go for me. I was like, well, what's it going to be? Who am I going to end up with? Ugh. And that fucked me up for so long that I think like it took a while of going back into my own space and having to work on my shit and getting clear on the fact that like humans evolve and also it's going to be okay no matter what.
Well, I think too, what's super important is like you have to, whatever issue you're coming into, which is for a lot of us, I think it's people you having to say like I'm gay or I'm this or I'm that. I think it's important for you to look at other people and try and find an aspect of their life that is relatable. So say like, you know, for my friends who are Black, if they date someone who isn't Black, they get a lot of flack from their community, and especially from their parents about not kind of, you know, being within the world and lifting up their own community. And it's interesting because I feel like the more we can tie together what makes us the same, the easier it's going to be. So this adversity that they face about who they date, or the adversity that even someone in religion faces about not wanting to like take a path and becoming a pastor. Like if they want to go do something else, like we have to find the divergences in all of our stories that actually bring us to the same place, which is, I think it's being that little bit of difference, and what makes you different is what we can all cling to. And I think the more we weave that together and the more you try and look for that in other people, the easier it's going to be to connect with them. Because right now I feel like we're it's, given the current administration we're under, it's a very abrupt and sort of violent and black and white scenario in terms of what's presented as right and wrong. And I think the more that you just look at another person that you may not necessarily agree with on any level and say, well, okay, but this person also went through this particular situation in this scenario where they felt different. How do I connect with them in that way? And how do I let them see that the moment that they felt different is how I feel now?
Yes.
And trying to find that to kind of bridge that gap of like,
yes,
we are all still human beings.
That's like,
like we're all still trying to figure this shit out together.
Yeah, and that's the only way to break through to somebody, especially if they're coming from, you know, a religious or Republican or whatever background. You know, you have that, they get trained in that rhetoric, and the only way to break through it is to have that like moment, just for a moment, where they're like, oh, that light bulb, oh, you feel like I felt that one time. Yeah, and it's like,
and it's shitty too. And a lot of people always tell me when I say things like that, they're like, well, why do I have to do the work? Like, why do I have to be the person that does that? And trust me, I get it. It's fucking exhausting. Like, like
it's like therapy is a thriving industry. Like,
seriously. Yeah.
Everything's hard.
Like everything's hard, and it's unfortunate that we were handed like a deck of cards that don't always work in our favor. But it's not about the work; it's about the outcome.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, I don't know, and part of this is just my personality, because I understand, like, this is not everybody's personality that you want to, like, interact with people and explain things to them. Like, you know, like, I get it. I mean, like, I enjoy it. To me, there is something of a privilege in having educated myself, like, not only being who I am, but, like, really doing the work to educate myself about this community. And then being able to talk to people about that it's exciting for me. And I know that's like the teacher in me that's just like, yay, give me students. But like, no, but it is. And there is a way of framing that is just about connecting with people and saying, this is who we are and we're pretty great.
It's amazing what conversation does. Just conversation.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be about your most pressing issues or the most obvious things about you. Honestly, like asking someone what kind of dog they have that you don't agree with, or asking somebody what they did over the summer or what they did for the holidays. Like, you have to get in on the base level, which is what's important to all of us, which is family and being happy and
what kind of dog
and that kind of stuff. I have a toy fox terrier, so he's really cute. George.
Yeah, we all have dogs.
What's your dog? Is
He's a mostly wiener dog.
Oh.
And then a mystery.
Yeah.
Shout out to Piero.
My Dobby is my dog. Dobby is a pretty elf. I say it to him 9 times a day, so that's fine.
So many socks. So
many socks. Actually, I put socks on for the first time recently. I can't believe I haven't posted the video yet. He had no idea what was going on. He was like,
I love when they do that.
He forgot how to walk.
It's like when I hold George over water sometimes and just watch him. It's the greatest thing in the world. He doesn't even know he's doing it. He doesn't even know he's doing it.
Anyway, guys, we're queer and have dogs.
So Briana,
New podcast.
I have a question. So it sounds like when you, when you were a teenager, you largely managed to avoid the moment of like internal panic, or maybe not. Actually, yeah.
I think it's almost. I don't think that goes away anywhere. I think there's a difference between finding your way and coming out and being a teenager.
That's a great point.
Like, being a teenager is shitty. I don't care what anyone says. It's not fun. It's especially not fun if you are different than the people around you. And I think no matter how confident you are in yourself, you're always going to have that little voice.
So you did still, even though you were making out with girls at 13.
Wait, and I want to go back to that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about hang on to that one. That is so fucking bold and awesome. I was only doing that under the guise of like, let's play the craft. They got
like 17.
Yeah.
Or 16.
No, I know, but for real, so like, but you said she was your girlfriend?
Yeah.
How the fuck did that happen? I'm so impressed. And how did you have a girlfriend at 13 and were you guys out? Did you like walk around holding hands like, oh,
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't, but here's the thing, it was depending on where we were. So it wasn't so much at like school. We wouldn't like walk around the halls and like, be like hand in hand at school.
Sure.
We'd definitely always be around each other and would always be laughing and hanging out. But any time out of school on the streets, there was like one little popular street where a college was in town, and we would like always be like hand in hand, fucking roaming around the streets together. But I also just think that's. There's some things that are just inherently who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's just inherently who I was. Like, I knew that I wanted to date this particular person, so I did it.
Did you ask her?
I think it was like a joint decision.
You guys
we were kind of like,
you
serious? You know this? Okay, yeah, let's do this.
Is she queer? Can I ask?
She is, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god, that's incredible.
Which, hey, it gives you hope. When you're that young, they are still out there, and some of them are vocal about it.
Yes, or some of them are still in the closet.
Yeah, some of them are still in the closet.
With a guy right after they hook up with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
and so then later when you whatever age you were when you first dated a guy, was that like, oh, I guess I'm gonna date guys too? Like, did you ever have that moment?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like even when I was at the Catholic middle school, I dated guys there, and I was totally fine with it.
So it always just
was back and forth, yeah.
And there was never.
I actually remember when I was a little bit older, probably like 20, 21, I had been dating a guy for a while, and I like sat him down at a restaurant, and was just sort of like, listen, there's other things I want to do, primarily women. And so, which I feel so bad, it broke his little heart, but at the same time, we're still friends. We're friends now, so it's totally fine. And we were both still young. It would have been bad news had we like settled down and made that work. But you know, it's just, it's a back and forth. I think that's kind of what you're saying. Like for me in particular, and I know this is not everyone's route or everyone's story, it's like I've always just gone with what I've wanted and what felt right. And no matter what that was, I of course faced some, you know, opposition or some, you know, it wasn't always the easiest choice to make, but I function on, if you're not happy with yourself, what's the point? I want to make myself happy before I can make anyone else happy, so I have to do me before I do anyone else. And that is me fucking doing what I want to and dating who I want and loving who I want. Like, it has nothing else to do with anyone. My parents, society, my job, I like really don't care. I want to go home at night and I want to be happy, so.
It sounds like you both knew your...
There's still people here.
It sounds like you not only knew yourself very well from a relatively young age, but trusted that, which I think is an important step, because I think a lot of us, like, I knew I was into girls for a long time, but until I, like, let it be okay, it was a constant struggle. So it's kind of a two-part process.
Yeah, no, that's why, like, you played the craft instead of being
Yeah.
like, I just make out with you. Like, I guess we'll do a spell. I guess we'll do a spell. Like, you know, whatever.
There's only so many times you can play dog.
There's only so many times you can hide under a spell.
Yeah.
But we only have about 15 minutes left, so we wanted to open up. We don't ever have the privilege of opening things up to an audience for questions. So do you guys have any questions you want to ask? Yeah.
Oh, we have a mic. We can actually...
Oh, yeah, if you want to come up and say it into the mic, this is going to be the loudest thing for everybody listening. Sure.
So I was wondering, I didn't have super liberal parents growing up, and so when I got the sex ed talk, it was very like heterosexual, and so I was wondering what your experience was like, just being out, being queer, being whoever you were, and how your parents approached that.
Great question.
Well, my mom got remarried to my stepdad, who comes from a very middle of America family, all very kind of buttoned up Americans, sweetest people in the world. But you know, there's a lot that was not necessarily in their vision. And so I think when I finally came to that age where it was time to learn about sex or about what it was, he didn't really have the words to help me, especially even when it came to men, honestly. Like, it wasn't even about me dating women. I think it's just that, I think times are a little bit different now, because this was also in like the late 90s, early 2000s when I kind of had this conversation, and I think it was a little harder to find the words to describe what you might be going through. But I think nowadays it's just, I hate to say this, but it's like trial by error.
Yeah.
Like, I honestly, I made a lot of mistakes. I bought the morning after pill a couple times. I definitely went to the doctor a few times and was like, this doesn't feel normal. But you know, it takes getting out there. And I think honestly, nobody can tell you exactly what to do. They can teach you how to be safe, which is, you know, obviously respect your body above all things. No matter what anyone wants to do to it, you come first, always. And do what you need to protect it. If that means you know, obviously using protection or you know, finding that sort of way to be ahead of it. But I think nowadays, in this day and age, we are in such a world of information that it really is on your shoulders more than anyone else to kind of figure out what needs to be done. And especially if your parents aren't going to tell you, Google is a great, it's a great research. And as awful as it is, and as much as it makes me cringe thinking that parents would want to like bestow that information upon something they created, it's the reality for a lot of people. And I think that, like they said, the LGBT Center in LA, I'm sure you have local communities, Planned Parenthood, even if you're a guy, you can go to Planned Parenthood. Like, it doesn't matter what's going on. There are so many resources now to find the answers, and it's gonna sting that your family doesn't want to have that conversation with you, or it doesn't necessarily, in your eyes, you don't think they care to have that conversation with you, but there are people who do. and you can find them literally everywhere,
Yeah.
and they're awesome. So talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of
absolutely.
course. And a ton of YouTubers. Stevie Boebi, who we had on the podcast a while ago, does a series of lesbian sex ed videos, and there are a lot of YouTubers who do queer sex ed videos because they also didn't grow up with that, and they saw a need, and they're filling a niche that's like.
Well, and also remember, just so that you don't feel like too alone in this, remember that even parents of like heterosexual kids have a really hard time with this. Like, I don't recall any sex talk ever happening, ever. And then and then while I was at my first girlfriend's house, who my parents were already not okay with, and I was at her house and I got a very angry call that my parents had found in a backpack a bottle of vodka and a condom wrapper, and I was picked up, and my father was furious and had no idea how to handle this, and so just told me I couldn't go to theater camp that summer.
Those damn theater kids.
Not going to theater camp.
I will say, for as educated as I am, there was a long time where I thought you could get pregnant just by touching a penis.
Oh my god!
And you're saying
this came up. That's the thing. Like, and I remember, my mom's reaction was somewhat better, but she basically put my dad in another room. She was like, "Honey, go watch TV," and then like sat me down. She poured herself a giant glass of Chardonnay and was like, "Okay." Like, and that was my sex talk. So I mean, but also I think that sex ed in general, I've thought about this a lot lately, because I actually have a lot of female friends who are trying to get pregnant, either with female partners and insemination and things, or with male partners, and who are coming up against an enormous amount of trouble and are trying for years, and are so sad and frustrated, which makes it even harder, right? Because we were all taught that if you just like jerk off and throw it at you'll get pregnant. I mean, really, it's like we're taught these like crazy extreme things with like so many gaps that we're all just kind of
Such a
trial and
weird
erroring it.
image of a fertility. There's a bunch of men just like throwing jizz.
Maybe that's why your friends aren't getting pregnant.
We keep throwing.
Keep throwing it.
It's not happening.
Anyway, so I think unfortunately in America, I could say I think that's a shared issue between a lot of us.
Yes, you are.
As a fellow yeehaw queer, I grew up in a very religious community. Luckily, family okay with it. But is there, like, Lauren and Nicole too, if there's like a word of advice you would give a young baby queer in these situations, like what would you say?
I would say, over everything, be kind. Kindness kills everything. If you give them nothing to throw back at you, their argument goes away real quick. And I found that especially with people who are very religious and feel like they are the ones who are so right. The kinder you are, the more it just highlights how they're wrong. And the more I have found, eventually they start to see the cracks of their own case. And I just think, honestly, true for yourself, like it's obviously exhausting when you come up against adversity like that on a daily basis in your community. But the nicer you are, it's not only going to make you feel better about the way you're presenting yourself, but it's also going to give them nothing to throw back at you. So just be nice and listen to what they have to say, even if it pisses you off, even if you literally want to like punch them in the face. And trust me, I've had a couple times where I'm like, I'm gonna snap your neck right now. I'm so angry. But you just have to, and I'm not saying grin and bear it. By no means smile and nod and be like, yes, of course, you're right. Don't do that. Don't agree with them. But just, you have to just say, I understand where you're coming from. I see how you got to that conclusion in your own mind. And, I respect that you feel that way. And just move forward, because the more you give them that, there's literally nowhere for them to go.
Yes. Oh my God, I so agree with that. And I want to also, what I would say is, we should preface it by saying, we try to say we're not an advice podcast. It's hard because we give a lot of advice. But that's like friendships too. You're like, I'm not going to be your therapist, but here's what I don't know what it is to be you, but I
But I do.
but I know better than you. No, but you know, so everybody's circumstance is different. But something that my mom said when she was on the podcast that I think has stuck with us, and that a lot of people have brought up afterwards, is that, you know, parents especially, and loved ones, and people who've known you since when, you know, who knew you when, it's like they have a story for your life. And you have had time to adjust and come to and find this narrative that is you, right? They are really just getting on board with that, and they have to shift an entire narrative that they've had that comes from a place of love and wanting you to be happy and well-adjusted, and often parents think that that's just like fitting in, you know? They're like, well, if they don't rock the boat, then like,
they're scared it'll be harder
they're
for you
scared
a lot of the
it'll be
time.
harder. And like just to give this quick example, and I'm pulling up my phone because my mom, this is how far my mom has come, and I think it's important to share this. So my mom, when I first came out, was sobbing in the car and told me that I would never have a happy family, and if I ended up with a woman, no man would ever want to be with me again, which is like, I was like, have you seen porn?
Yeah, like
so I was like, I think I know there. Like, you know, but like she was just coming from a place of such fear, and she had so much trouble for years with girls that I would bring home until finally she's gotten used to it. And like so that woman texted me this yesterday. I wanted to share this because she listens to the podcast. So she's gotten like this whole queer education. She just texted me, it occurred to me that you were not forced to identify as any gender as a baby. Your room was pastel green and Care Bears came in every color. I must have unintentionally had the right instinct. And then, and then I was like, Mommy, I just tweeted this. She was like, what's Twitter? She goes, wow, I said something tweet-worthy. Karen, hey, Karen. And then she said this, and this is it. She said, and yesterday in my Al-Anon meeting, and she goes, again, therapy, she does a lot of therapy. She said, yesterday in my Al-Anon meeting, I mentioned the many male references to God, e.g. our Father, have been really bothering me. And I said, I also don't want God to be a woman. And then it hit me that I said, I thought God should be called they. And she said, see what an influence you've had on me? Straight folks can be educated. That's the same woman who like burst into tears and told me I would never have a happy life. You know, like really patience and kindness and just showing up as who you are over and over and over again.
Yes, consistency in who you are.
Yes.
Don't falter and try and become something you're not. It never works. It never works.
And also for those, we talked a little earlier about, you know, you form your chosen family, your community, and for those who are in circumstances where, you know, they can't do that in person at the moment, if you're unable to find physical people to be your community, for all its faults, online, it has been a tremendous resource. Like finding Twitter, Instagram, you search hashtags, you can find people, you have access to people who want to talk. I mean, like me and Nicole want to talk to people about this. There are people out there going through the same things. So I would heavily encourage, like, trust, know in your heart, hey, eventually I will fill this space with real physical bodies. But in the meantime, online is a tremendous resource if you are in circumstances where you don't have that.
And thank God it's not an AOL chat room anymore.
Oh, God.
Those were so weird. I gotta say, that was a terrible way to be introduced to the internet.
Horrible. If those of you who are not in that generation want to know about it, watch Pen 15. On you will immediately know. We have time for one more question, and I saw your hand. Yeah.
Ooh, yes, thank you.
I love that. I shit more than FedEx. You're probably better at it too.
So I'm also a yeehaw queer. Thank you for
Yeah, yeehaw queers, come on.
So I'm from Norfolk, Virginia, which also has an Azalea Festival.
Yes, I know it well. I know it well.
So that kind of blew my mind when they asked you, and you mentioned how that gave you hope, and I feel like we didn't get sort of the full experience of why that gave you hope, and I would love to hear more about that.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Let me lead in with saying every year the Azalea Festival kind of rotates through board members, so they kind of work their way up the chain. My particular year, I got a Republican farmer who chose me. It was his choice. And this is what gives me hope. This guy comes from, his brother-in-law is an incredible Baptist pastor. Like, those words coming out of my mouth literally blows my mind. I met this guy, sweetest man in the world, so kind, so loving, so accepting, had literally no qualms about just taking you at face value and what you put into the world. On paper, that family and that particular situation could have been so terrible. And by all means, for a lot of people, would have been. But I was kind of handed this person who was willing to look past any sort of preconceived notion of what is right, and took me at face value and said, this girl is from North Carolina. She speaks out and is trying to be good for people and do some good for people. She's successful in what she does, and most importantly, she's from here. It's a no-brainer. And for him, he literally said this. He was like, "Listen, I know there's a lot of like uproar about this and that. Like, you don't look like the typical queens and everything." He's like, "I can give two shits." He's like, he's the best, mind you. Again, Republican farmer. Like, you would think the two of us would not get along. Love him. I love him. It gives me hope because I think that there is so much unseen behind people, which again comes with my pushing being kind and trying to relate to people. I could have walked into there and just been like this, arms crossed, very like, okay, cool, yeah, thanks, I'll show up when you need me to. But instead, sat down, I asked him about his family, I asked him about his work, I asked him about what his day looked like, about how it was putting the festival together. We connected on so many levels, and that sort of kindness and connection that we had then trickled down to everyone around us. And anyone who may have kind of been giving a little bit of side eye or a little bit like, oh God, what's she gonna do? Which, I thought about some things to do. Anyone who might have been like, oh, is she gonna gay it up and flip her middle finger everywhere? Like, which I'm sure for a lot of people was probably, they were concerned about that because again, like I said, it's very traditional. It was a very traditional celebration, which I went into respecting fully because I understand it's important to people. And I wanted to honor that. And I think that they honored my presence. So it was in my responsibility, not only as their representative, but also just as a human to honor the good in them as well. And I think that the people that I did rub up against who were not necessarily in my favor, some of them just weren't nice. And that's just the way it is. They just clearly are people who are very tormented by a lot of things. And you just don't give them you don't give them your time, you don't give them your energy. And I will say there was one particular instance at an event where the board members clearly were sort of like rushing me away from someone who was making a bit of a stink. But it just goes to show you, this board member is created of people who are from all creeds and walks of life, and not only political affiliations, but religious affiliations and whatever it is that they get into on their own time. They all come together, and they all made it happen, and they all clearly saw that there was something good worth protecting and good worth projecting out into the world, and they made the choice to go with that. And I think that gave me hope in the sense of there is so much that could have gone wrong, but it was honestly the best.
So, Briana, where can people find you online if they don't know already?
You can find me on Instagram at House of Venskus, Twitter at the Venskus, but like I said yesterday, I'm really bad at tweeting.
Me too.
You hear about it? I'm like, hi. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mostly am on Instagram, so if you want to get weird on Instagram, find me.
I am at Nicole Pacent on Twitter and Instagram.
I am at Lauren Flans on Twitter, Lauren_Flans on Instagram.
We are, yes, okay, so we're finally, many people have asked us about this, we are finally in the process of setting up a Patreon. So as much as we love bringing you content for free, we also have other jobs and things we have to do, and this takes a lot of work and a lot of time.
We pour.
So, if you feel that you want to check out our Patreon page, we're going to have that up on our website. We're going to put it out through our socials. It will have different perks.
Yeah, DM us all.
Including some outtakes of us trying to do sponsor ads.
Like Dana's book, we had some outtakes from that.
Riffing and saying inappropriate things. But many things. So please do check that out. And we also, let's see. Oh yeah, and I wanted to mention for those of you who've seen our buttons but don't know what they're about, hashtag Find Ricky is our mission. It's our mission should you choose to accept it. It's your mission too. I won't go into the whole story, but check out our first episode. In my coming out story, there is someone named Ricky who plays a massive part in my own realization. And I know nothing about Ricky except that Ricky was a field hockey camp counselor at UConn in the year 2000. And I have no last name, and we might not have even spelled Ricky right. I don't know.
We're batting 1,000.
We're really going for it. Literally half of my meet and greet yesterday was all of us sitting around with our phones trying to stop Ricky. So we're trying. So if you would like to take on that, you can listen to the first episode, find out the full story, and then get on board with hashtag Find Ricky.
Yeah.
So
to that end,
you can
find us on social media by our hashtags. Our hashtags are hashtag coming out pod, hashtag